Hello, English class. It's me, Professor Simons. I'm recording a video. Let's do a short one. Quoting and citing, that's what we're talking about. We're going to make it short because it's midnight, my girlfriend's asleep, and I forgot I had to record one of these. So let's talk about quoting and citing with me, Professor Simons. Very handsome. Before we actually talk about quoting and citing, let's talk about the two simpler things. If you're trying to use a source, you might want to summarize or you might want to paraphrase. What's the difference? The difference is this. Summarizing, you're taking the entire thing and putting it in your own words. So, if you're summarizing the article, How One Stupid Tweet Blew Up Justine Sacco's Life, you'd have to talk about the entire thing, basically a little bit about Justine Sacco, but the bigger idea, which is how internet shaming affects people. Paraphrasing, you're just taking a small part and putting it in your own words. So, for example, if you just wanted to paraphrase just the part about Justine Sacco, put it in your own words, that would be paraphrasing. But the idea here is you don't have to use word for word. In fact, you shouldn't. You're using your own words, and that's what makes the difference between these and quoting. One tricky thing, though. Even though they're your own words, for both summarizing and paraphrasing, you are technically supposed to cite. So add a citation to both paraphrases and summarizes. But we'll talk about that in a little bit. For now, let us move on. Floating quote. Many of you have probably seen me write floating quote or FQ somewhere in your papers, and that is bad. Here's what a floating quote is. Floating quote, bad, it would be when you just have a quote somewhere in the middle of your paper. So something like, it rained. That is a complete sentence, but right now it is a floating quote. Just the quote, nothing else before or after it. You need a couple things to turn this into a real quote that is not a floating quote. In fact, you need 4 things. Here are the 4 things you need to quote anything correctly. First, you need a thing called the signal phrase. The study showed. That is now what makes this not a floating quote. It's no longer just a quote that's floating on its own. Now you actually have part of the sentence. The study showed. Now you've got a subject, a predicate. Now it's a complete thing. Then you need quotation marks. Obviously you need 2 of them, one at the beginning and one at the end. That shows the reader that this is word for word somebody else's thing. Next, you need the quote itself, and like I said, it should be word for word the exact same as the original source. And then at the end, you need the citation. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But you need those 4 things. Signal phrase, quotation marks, the quote, and the citation. Then you've got a correct quote. But even then, you got some tricky formatting things. There should be a period at the very end after the citation, and you almost always want to separate the signal phrase and the quote with a comma. That makes that a correct quote. But we'll do some practice a little bit later. Moving on. I said the quote has to be word for word, but there are a few exceptions to that. You might want to add something to a quote. For example, if the quote is maybe too vague or too confusing and the reader won't know what it means. So there is a way to add to a quote. So let's take a look at this example if we want to add to it. According to the students, there is our signal phrase, so we've got that, then we've got the comma, then the quote itself. He is great and deserves a building named after him. Then we've got the citation. But if you were just to give this to some random person, that person might not know who he is. So you probably do have to add something. Here's how you add. You need brackets. Brackets shows the reader this is no longer word for word the quote, this is now my own words. And then you're just going to clarify whatever needs to be clarified. So he, Jeff. Now the reader knows, okay, Jeff is this person who is he. You've added that, it's in brackets, so we know it's not part of the quote. And then the quote jumps back in. Good? Okay. And again, you'll notice things like the punctuation at the end of the citation. You've got the comma between the signal phrase and the quote itself. And that's what it's supposed to look like. Similarly, let's say you want to take something away from a quote. This is kind of the same thing. It has to be word for word, so you have to show the reader, okay, something has been changed. And you do it with brackets again. So in this case, let's go with, the students said Professor Simons deserves a building named after him. Let's say the original quote was Professor Simons is great and deserves a building named after him. If we're taking out some words, we can take it out, but we have to replace it with brackets, and then a dot, dot, dot. That tells the reader, okay, something has been taken out here, but it doesn't change the actual sentence itself. Good? Moving on. I haven't seen any movement in the attempt to get a building named after me, so I just want to remind you what's at stake. This is what I want it to look like. Simons Hall, that is the building in all its glory. And if possible, I would like a statue of me on the side, maybe flexing my muscles, I don't know, something that shows me in all of my glory. This is what I'm looking for. Please tell the school when we come back to campus, you expect them to see this. You expect a building named after me. Let's move on. Okay, let's move into citations. MLA citing, it is important. Here's why it's important. If you give me a fact and there's no citation next to it, one of two things has just happened. One, you're making that fact up, and if you're making it up, it does not help your essay at all. Or two, and even worse, you didn't make it up, you found it somewhere, but you didn't give that person credit, and therefore it's plagiarism. So if you have a fact but there's no citation, it's either unjustified and doesn't help you, or it's citation and can get you kicked out of school. So this is crazy important. A few of the basics you need to know. There are two different kinds of citations. There are in-text citations, and then there are works cited citations. You need them both. Every time you have a fact, you need an in-text and a works cited to go along with it. The in-text are the easy ones, relatively, and the works cited ones are much trickier. So let's talk about them each a little bit. In-text citation. At the end of a sentence, but before the period, you need a parenthetical in-text citation. It is surrounded by parentheses, and you only need two things. First, you need the author's last name, and next, you need a page number. That's it. Those are the only two things you need. Anything else that you add is probably wrong. For example, all of these right now look pretty correct to me. Simon's 14, Simon's 14, Simon's 14. If you add a comma, that is now wrong. If you add a dash, that is now wrong. If you add a PG to show page, that is wrong. Or a P to show page, that is now wrong. Let's say you give the first name 99% of the time, that is also wrong. This is all you need. A name and a number. That is it. Then the question comes, what if you are missing one of those two things? What if instead of Simon's 14, you're missing either the page number or the author? Let's start with the easy one, missing the page number. Let's say you have it, you know who the author is, but there's no page numbers. This is easy because all you're going to do is leave it off. This is now what the citation should look like. Just a last name, nothing else. Because the page number really isn't that important and you don't want to make one up or try and just say one, just leave it off. The trickier thing though is what if you're missing the author's name? What if you find an article but there's no author with it? For this, instead of the author's last name, you're going to use the next most specific thing. So either the name of the article, maybe the name of the journal, the name of the story, whatever's next most specific. So let's say we have the name of the article and it's called, I don't know, Beatles. I don't know. That could be an article I write. Who knows? Then the page number, and there's that. So if you're missing the page number, leave it off. If you're missing the author's name, you have to replace it with the next most specific thing you can find. Let's keep going. We're getting close to the end. Works cited. These are really, really hard because there's so many different ways to do them. In MLA, you might have to cite a photograph, an article, a short story, a poem, an art show, a TV show, a YouTube video, a pamphlet, a study, anything in the world. So there's hundreds of different types of works cited format. You have to look up for yourself what type of format fits the thing you're trying to cite, because there are so very many. But there are some things that are always going to be true of works cited. First, you have to list all of your things in alphabetical order. So just as a quick reminder, that would be A, and then B, and then C, and then you can look up the rest if you're kind of fuzzy on it. Next, they have to be in hanging indent form. This is a super weird thing. It's basically the opposite of a paragraph. So, if you're writing an essay, a paragraph looks like this. You indent the first line, and everything after is flush with the margin. Just like that. For a hanging indent, it's the exact opposite. The first line is flush with the margin, and every line after that is indented once, until you get to your next citation, then flush with the margin all over again. So that is what it's supposed to look like, not that. And finally, like I said, formatting, it can be really tricky. You've got to find out the formatting for whatever thing you are citing. If it's an article on a website, that'll be different from a photograph, which will be different from a YouTube video, which will be different from a movie. So, the one thing I can say about this is, your best friend will be the website Purdue OWL. Purdue is the college that puts this together, and OWL stands for Online Writing Lab. Purdue OWL has every rule that you'll ever need to know about MLA. So you will certainly use it at some point in your school career. Even if you're not in a program that uses MLA, Purdue OWL has APA and Chicago style and Harvard style and all the different ones. So this website will be your best friend. That way you don't have to memorize 10,000 different formatting structures. Good? Okay. Last, I want to talk about things like EasyBib, the online resources that will basically make the citation for you. And my question is this: is EasyBib garbage? And the answer is a resounding yes. Kinda. A little. It's complicated. It's actually not that bad. EasyBib is not that bad. RefWorks is even better than that. But even the best website that makes citations for you is not going to be perfect. At best, it'll get you about 90% of the way there. Which means, if you just use EasyBib and you submit your paper to somebody, you will probably have at least 10% wrong. And that is not good. So, EasyBib is a really good way to get you 90%, but then you still have to go check out Purdue OWL, check out other websites, double check it, proofread it, and make sure you're on the right track. Okay, so with all this nonsense, we've talked about quoting, what makes paraphrases, what makes citations, how to structure a full quote, how to not have a floating quote, what things you need, and we've talked about citing, what has to go into an in-text citation, what goes into a works cited page, all the big things. So make sure as you write your future papers, both of these, you're looking at them, you're paying attention to them, and you're getting them as correct as possible. That's it. Thank you for joining me. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.